This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a writing sample with my currently inked pens on Tomoe River 52 GSM paper. This is an old Hobonichi Weeks that I like to use for playing with my pens and ink. I'll be writing with a Monteverde Ritma that has the little miniature Omniflex nib. I've also got a Pilot Explorer with a medium nib, a Pilot E95S with a 14 karat fine nib, a Kaweco Liliput with a double broad nib, and I've also got this little Zebra V301 fountain pen that the ink that came with it in a cartridge, it's water resistant and it's very practical. It's just not a fun ink to write with. On the papers that I like to use, it tends to feather a little bit and bleed through paper pretty badly. But I did hear in the comments that this ink is really good for writing on that slick magazine paper, and it also performs well when writing checks. I also heard in the comments that Lamy cartridges work in these pens, so I'm going to give that a try. I've got a Lamy Blue Black, one Lamy Blue Black cartridge left, which is kind of a surprise because I never was really fond of this ink. I don't remember using that many cartridges, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. Pop it into this pen so it can be saturating the feed. Now the feed on this pen is a fiber feed, and it's almost like a little tiny paintbrush, little white fibers. This is my empty cartridge. I save that so that I can refill it later. Now I'm going to have to press down. There we go. Yeah, that fit nicely. Now I just hope, oh no, I hope, it does fit. Good. That kind of scared me. I thought it might be too long. Okay, so it hasn't saturated the feed yet. I'm going to give it a little shake. That's what the instructions said on the package for this pen. Now the ink that came with it was very watery and it saturated the feed pretty quickly. Okay, I'm going to let that soak while we're doing the other writing samples. I'm going to begin with the Monteverde Ritma. You may see this is prone to picking up fingerprints, the shiny cap, but the pen itself has a nice matte finish that feels really nice, and it doesn't pick up fingerprints. The little miniature Omniflex nib is unmarked. I've got it inked up with Diamine Earl Grey. Okay, you may have noticed I had a little bit of a hard start here at the beginning. Depending on the ink I use, I can get some pretty severe hard starts. This has been the best performing ink, and I don't typically have hard starts. Earl Grey performs very well. It may have just been because I had held the pen open for just a little while before I started writing, but you may be able to see this nib is slightly stubby. It's a little bit wider on the downstrokes than it is on the side strokes. I just love this ink in this pen, and I've been using it with one of the little Apica notebooks, the little Apica pocket notebooks, and it just performs really well on that paper. The shading is just beautiful. for quick notes. The dry time is very nice. And I've also recently started using this pen and ink combo in a little A5 ARC notebook. I'm using the ARC paper, and it's pretty absorbent, but it's not so absorbent that it doesn't feel like you're using a fountain pen. It still feels very nice. I've loved this pen ever since I discovered that it performs well with Earl Grey. Next, I'll be writing with my Pilot Explorer. It has a stainless steel medium nib, and the converter I'm using with it is just the little squeeze converter. I've got it inked up with Herbin Poussière de Lune, and I can just dip it in the bottle, give it a little squeeze, and refill it. On Tomoe River paper, this nib is just glassy smooth, but I've been using this pen and ink combo in my Clever Fox journal. When I initially did the writing samples with it, trying to figure out, how the paper would perform with fountain pens and what ink I would like the best, the Pilot Explorer with this Herbin ink felt a little drier than the other inks that I tried, but as I wrote with it a little more, it was my favorite, and it is the ink that I use in this notebook, or this is a planner, but I use it as a notebook, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm probably going to continue to use this ink until, I guess I could use it till I finish this notebook. And the little pin loop works nicely. This Explorer is tapered just enough that I'm able to get it in there without too much fuss. And the gold looks pretty good with the little gold fox. I like everything about this pen, ink, and paper combo. Next, I've got a Pilot E95S. It has a 14 karat fine nib. These three pen and inks are three examples of pen and inks that I just love together. When I started writing with them, they just clicked. And I've had several people tell me that when they saw my video about the E95S, that was part of their decision-making process to get this pen, and they just loved it. And I've always loved this pen. I think it's a beautiful pen, but I just never found myself picking it up and writing with it until I tested it with KWZ Honey. I just love this combination. In fact, I had even thought about getting this fine nib ground into kind of a fine stub, but once I discovered this pen and ink combination, no way. I wouldn't change anything about it. This fine nib does write more like a Pilot medium nib. It's pretty wet, but with this ink, I just love it. I love it on Leuchtturm paper. Right now I'm using it a lot in my some lines a day. In fact, I use all of these pens. I alternate between them. But I really enjoy this on the Leuchtturm paper. And in fact, I noticed after using this glassy smooth steel medium nib, on this, even on this smooth Tomoe River paper, this had kind of a chalky feel to it. And one of the things I've noticed, I've looked at this nib under a loop since it's so much wetter than like a normal Pilot Fine nib. Instead of the tines coming together slightly at the end, they're more parallel. So I think that's where you're getting that, where I'm getting that friction from. But it's not unpleasant, it's not scratchy, and this is a decent reverse rider. Yeah, so if you need to write smaller than this wet fine, you can do it by reverse writing. Now I think I did smooth out. I did run this over a little micro mesh on the reverse side. It was just a little bit scratchy, slightly scratchy. And I did the same thing with the Pilot Explorer. I can't remember if I ran the Ritma over some micro mesh, but it is also a pretty good reverse rider. Next, I've got a Kaweco Liliput. It has a stainless steel double broad nib. And I've got it inked up with Diamine Writer's Blood. This is very wet. Very fun to write with. This one is not a very good reverse writer. It's really dry, but with this exceptionally wet ink, it works. But usually with most inks, it's just too dry. However, my Kaweco broad nib is a fantastic reverse writer. There's not a whole lot of difference between my Kaweco broad and double broad, except that the broad is a really nice reverse writer, is a little bit better tuned for that. And I had heard that the Kaweco double broads had some stubbiness to them, but mine doesn't. Now this pen and ink combination I've been using with just some regular note cards. Nothing special about these. They're not the fountain pen friendly kind. They're just very inexpensive. But even with this really wet writing broad nib, they don't perform too bad. I was worried that this would feather, and the letters do look just slightly ragged. Not hardly noticeable. You really have to be looking for it. But yeah, performs pretty good for that purpose. Now let's see if this zebra. Okay, it doesn't look like, I don't think. No, the ink hasn't made it through. Now the fiber feed on my Pilot Petite 1, it usually conducts ink really quickly, but it might be a larger piece of fiber than this. I'm not sure. The ink seems to be working its way through the feed a little bit. The feed is not quite as white as it was initially, but it's still not writing yet. Okay, this is interesting. It's a little bit darker still, but it seems like there was some water from when I cleaned it still in that feed. Can you even see that? It's like I'm writing with water right now. Let's try to draw some of this out with a paper towel. Okay, let's see how it writes now. Yeah, still very pale. Getting better. Okay, now let's try it. It feels very nice, but I don't think this is the final color. I could be wrong. That might be as dark as it's going to get. Well, it feels very nice. It's not very dark. Let's see, this is the, let me do the little scribble, and it's very smooth. And this is Lamy Blue Black. Pretty pale. It looks like a faded denim. It's very smooth. That ink smear was contaminated with some writer's blood. I don't know. I'll have to try this on some different types of paper, and that might be as dark as it gets. That might be something I have to report back on. Before I wrap this up, I want to go ahead and show the reverse writing of each of these pens side by side. This is the Monteverde Pocket Ritma. And this is regular. This is the Pilot Explorer. And then this is writing regular with it, the regular medium nib. And one more time, the E95S. Oh, this is the reverse scribble. And then this is the regular fine nib, 14 karat fine nib. This is the Kaweco broad nib in reverse, or double broad nib. It's not normally a good reverse writer, but this just shows you if the problem is that it's dry, putting a wet enough ink in it can make it very usable. Now, it's been several hours since the initial writing test with the Zebra, and you can see the feed is much darker now, much more saturated with this Lamy black. And then this is in the regular orientation, a bit wetter. So each of these nibs are very usable in the reverse orientation with the ink that they're currently inked up with. The Ritma, I don't believe I did any smoothing on the nib. If I did, it was very little smoothing. Now the others, I had to do a bit more with micro mesh, but still that was the extent of the work that I had to do on the reverse of the nib. Okay, I want to clarify before I wrap this all up that this is a Monteverde pocket neck pen, the Monteverde Ritma pocket neck pen. It's got another finial that you can replace this finial with that has a lanyard loop, and it comes with a lanyard attached to it. I don't use that very often. I've had no issues. The lid or the cap attaches very strongly with magnets, so I worry about wearing it around my neck, but I don't think I really have any reason to unless you're just doing something very rigorous. Another thing I wanted to point out is this little hard start I had with the scribble is probably due to the type of converter I'm using. These little Monteverde converters, just because of how small they are, ink tends to stick in the back. It's got a little plastic bead, so normally I just give it a little tap. Let's see. Yeah, a little bit of it flowed down to the feed. So this is really only an issue I run into as I have less ink in the converter. If it's mostly full, I don't really have an issue. And if I'm using an ink that is really, really wet and flowy, that's not really an issue. I mentioned that I'm enjoying writing with this Pilot Explorer much more than I expected to. I really just bought this pen for the nib, to be able to put the nib in my Pilot Prera. But yesterday I bought two more of these. This is the gold finish. I bought a silver and a copper just because it's not a bad looking little pen, and it goes great in notebooks. I'm really enjoying it. I like that it can use the larger converter, the Con 70. It gives it a little weight, and it, feels nice in the hand. My E95S, I'm pretty sure it's getting low in ink, but I can't tell, so I need to get a Pilot cartridge. I thought I had a used Pilot cartridge. That way it would stick out here farther in the back and you could see how much ink you have left. But I've got several full cartridges that came with pens, but I need to use one of those so that I don't have to use a converter, and I'll have a larger ink capacity and I'll be able to see my ink. And I wanted to mention that I'm enjoying my Kaweco Liliput a lot more now that I got a little clip, the little removable clip to put on it. I think it looks nice with the black pen. And now I've got a roll stop. I'm not worried about it rolling off the table. And finally, this Lamy Blue Black feels much nicer in this pen. It's much more pale than I was expecting, but we'll see how this works out. I know this Lamy Blue Black, I never really did like using it that much in my Lamy Steel nibs, but in my Lamy Gold nib, it was enough wetter that I liked it. I'm just not a big fan of this pale blue, but I have a notebook I think this might look good in, my Filofax clip book. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.